Let's talk about databases, and in particular, SQL databases. That's a particular type of database, and it's the kind we talk to using SQL, which is Structured Query Language. So, a database contains a bunch of information, right? And it's an alternative form of storing that data than, say, a file. And you might use it for a couple of reasons, right? Maybe the data that you want to use is much, much bigger than fits on your computer, right? Maybe you've got lots of computers that you want to all be able to connect to the same data. You got a bunch of smartphones here. This guy uploads a picture. You want this guy to be able to see it and this guy to be able to see it. So you can't store just a file on each machine. You need somewhere central to store it, right? Another reason might be that you want to capture the relationship between items. So let's say you've got people and posts and likes, right? And you want to store the relationship. This guy made this post, this guy liked that thing, and actually, there were 10 likes, right? And you want to store that rich kind of relational information. You can do that with a database too. So let's take a look at what's in a database. Data in databases is stored inside tables, and usually a database will have lots of tables. Some might have only a few columns, some might have lots of columns, some might have a few rows, some might have lots of rows, but databases are going to store them in columns and rows in these tables. So you might have, if you're, say, Facebook, you might have one table of likes, one of users, and one of posts, right? Now, it's important to know that in each one of these tables, every row refers to exactly one object. So in our likes table, this row is a like, a like, a like, a like, a like, and every column is a fact about that, right? So this might be who, and this might be liked what, right? Who liked what, on what date, on what date, on what date, on what date. Columns are always facts, and rows are always the item that we're talking about when we talk about the table. Let's talk about how we get data out of our database in Python. So over here, we've got our computer, and we want to establish a connection to the database. You can think of a connection kind of like a tube. We send across it in one direction SQL queries, and those are written in structured query language. We'll talk a little bit about how to write one of those in a little bit. They're really powerful, and they're actually very simple. And we get back in return just the data we ask for. So if you have a giant database, you don't need to load the entire thing onto your computer like you would with a file. You can just say, give me just the names, right? And it will send back just the names. Or give me just row 2, and it will give you just row 2. Or you could say, give me all the rows where user's favorite color is blue. So I give you this row, or give you this row, and send it right back across as data. So in Python, the way we do that is we use Python's SQLite module, right? So that's SQL, and sometimes you'll hear SQL pronounced SQL, SQLite 3. So in order to use that, we just say import SQLite 3. We want to create that connection we talked about. So we say SQLite 3 dot connect, and because we're using SQLite is just a file-based database, we can give it just a file name. So we can say sample.db, and in return for that, we get a database connection. So we'll label that variable dbcon, right? And with that connection, we can execute SQL queries. So we can say dbcon.execute, and we provided a query. A query that we'll write is basically just going to be a string, and they're specially made, right, because they're in structured query language. But we just give it this string, and in return, we get back a cursor. And a cursor contains two things. It contains the data we asked for, but it also contains metadata. And metadata is just data about data. In our data, we'll find exactly the rows and columns we asked for. And over here in our metadata, we'll find information about those things. So we'd find, say, the number of rows that were returned. Even before we download it all, it will tell us, hey, you said give me all the columns where user's favorite color were blue. There are 2 of those. And we also get information about, say, column names and column types. So if we had users' age in there, that might be stored as an integer. If we had users' names, that's probably a string and whatnot. So we get back both of these things with a cursor, the data and the metadata. And we'll talk about in the next few exercises exactly how we access each of these and how we write those SQL queries, which is that little string that we pass when we say, database connection, execute this thing for me. Give me these rows and these columns.